I went to visit my husband's grandfather and he showed me the big stick. Good afternoon to all the followers of the Forbidden Encounters channel. My name is Harper. I'm 27 years old, and I've been married to Ethan for 5 years. Our union has always been solid, somewhat predictable, but quite cozy. Ethan is an admirable man, the kind every woman would dream of having by her side. Caring, responsible, and always ready to make me smile. However, as time went by, I realized that something inside me had changed. Routine had set in a way that we didn't know how to manage, and life as a couple, which used to be full of emotion, had become excessively ordinary. The love still remained, but the passion, that spark that made my heart race, seemed to be slowly fading. That's why, when Ethan suggested we spend a few days on vacation at his grandfather's farm, I saw it as a valuable opportunity. Perhaps the fresh air of the countryside, far from the urban chaos and everyday distractions, could bring back that feeling I had been longing for. I longed to escape the monotony, and maybe that different environment was exactly what we needed to reconnect our souls. Ethan's grandfather, Henry, lived alone on a farm a few hours away from the city. Ethan often spoke fondly of him, describing him as a robust, hard-working man who dedicated his life to cultivating the land. They didn't meet often, and this trip also represented an opportunity for Ethan to enjoy precious time with his grandfather, something he always mentioned he missed. We set off on a sunny morning, and the journey, although long, was fairly uneventful. The route to the farm was stunning, surrounded by landscapes that looked like they had come straight out of a work of art. I felt a peace in the air that enveloped me and relaxed me, a comforting feeling that everything would be fine. At the same time, however, there was a slight restlessness inside me. Perhaps it was just the discomfort that accompanies a change of environment, or perhaps it indicated something deeper, something I still couldn't fully understand. We arrived at the farm in the late afternoon, and right from the start I was struck by the beauty of the place. The simple but extremely well-kept wooden house was surrounded by a vast expanse of green. Majestic trees surrounded the property, and the birdsong seemed to create a perfect soundtrack for the idyllic setting. The air there was different, purer, and brought a sense of freedom that I wasn't used to experiencing in the city. Stay with us until the end, and don't miss a single detail of this tale. Henry welcomed us with a discreet but firm smile. He was exactly as Ethan had described, a man in his 70s who looked much younger than his real age. His body was strong, shaped by years of hard work in the fields, and his eyes, although rigid and full of experience, emanated a vital energy, as if he still had a lot to live for. "You've finally arrived," said Henry, in a deep, husky voice that immediately captured my attention. He looked directly at me, his eyes dark and intense, and I felt a slight shiver run through my body. "We took longer than we expected," Ethan replied, always relaxed, as he unloaded the suitcases from the car. I remained silent, just watching the imposing figure before me. Henry wasn't like the other men I knew. He had an almost intimidating presence, but at the same time, there was something about him that fascinated me, a brute strength that I couldn't ignore. His gestures were firm and controlled, like those of someone who was used to leading, not being led. The way he moved conveyed confidence and authority, and I found myself intrigued, admiring this mixture of power and wisdom that emanated from him. The first night on the farm was quiet. Ethan and Henry talked for hours about the work in the fields, the crops, and the old memories they shared. I listened to them from a distance, trying to concentrate on their words, but my mind was elsewhere. I couldn't stop thinking about how Henry was watching me. His eyes, always so fixed, seemed to penetrate me, seeing beyond what I was willing to reveal. It was as if he knew more about me than I was capable of understanding. While they talked, I lost myself in thought, reflecting on that unexpected connection. There was something deeply intriguing about the way he looked at me, something that aroused confusing and intense feelings in me. That night, I lay next to Ethan, trying hard to push these disturbing thoughts away. He was exhausted from the trip and fell asleep quickly, while I stayed awake. I tried to close my eyes, but as soon as I did, Henry's face immediately appeared in my mind. There was something about his manner, an intense energy that made me feel emotions I hadn't experienced for a long time. It was as if he was awakening in me a woman I had forgotten existed, bringing out desires and longings that had been lying dormant. The feeling was confusing and disturbing, and I struggled between my loyalty to Ethan and my growing attraction to Henry. The next few days were a mixture of calm and tension. During the day, Ethan spent most of his time helping his grandfather with the various chores around the farm. He really enjoyed getting his hands dirty, and seeing my husband working with such enthusiasm always made me smile. I would try to distract myself by helping with the housework or walking around the grounds, but invariably I would find myself thinking about Henry. He was always nearby, watching from afar, with that intense gaze that made me restless and fascinated at the same time. While Ethan devoted himself to his work, I could feel an internal battle brewing inside me. My attraction to Henry was growing every day, becoming harder and harder to ignore. The countryside, with its serene beauty, contrasted with the storm of emotions raging in my heart. One particularly hot afternoon, Ethan had to go into town to sort out some problems and left me alone at the farm with Henry. The silence in the house seemed to increase the tension between us, and I sensed that something was about to happen. I was standing on the veranda, looking out over the vast countryside, when I heard Henry's heavy footsteps approaching. My heart raced, and I knew I was about to enter dangerous territory. He approached slowly, as if he knew exactly what effect he was having. "Do you like the place?" His voice sounded hoarse, but there was something else there, a layer of meaning that he wasn't expressing. "Very much." "It's a different place," I replied, trying to remain calm, but my voice came out a little hesitant, betraying the restlessness I felt inside. Henry looked at me with his usual intensity, and for a moment, I felt that he could see beyond my words, that he knew exactly what I was feeling. He leaned against the balcony, right next to me, and the warmth of his body next to mine made my body shiver. I knew I should move away, that it wasn't right, but my feet felt like they were stuck to the ground, as if they were trapped by a spell that prevented me from moving. "You seem out of place here," he said, keeping his gaze fixed on my eyes. I swallowed, trying to think of something to say in response, but my mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions and desires. I wasn't out of place. In fact, I was deeply attracted to him, to this man who seemed to dominate everything around me, including me. Before I could say anything, he put his hand on the railing, his fingers lightly brushing mine. It was a simple touch, almost innocent, but full of meaning. My whole body responded to that touch in a way I hadn't expected. Heat rose throughout my body, and I knew I was playing with fire. "You know you're playing with fire, don't you?" he said, his voice low but full of certainty, as if he was aware of the risky game we were about to play. I knew it. Of course I knew. I was there, alone with him, feeling things I shouldn't be feeling, and yet I couldn't pull away. It was as if I was trapped in that moment, unable to leave, even though I knew the right thing to do would be to run. Adrenaline coursed through my body and, for a moment, I considered crossing that dangerous line. I had a relationship with my husband's grandfather right there on the balcony. "There's no way you can tell your grandson about this," I said, in a mixture of euphoria and pleasure. "You can rest assured, my princess. This is our secret," he replied, his voice filled with a seductive tone that echoed in my mind. After 30 minutes of relief and forbidden discoveries, the sound of footsteps coming from the entrance brought me back to reality. Ethan was back in town. I quickly turned away from Henry, my heart pounding, trying to disguise whatever was happening between us. He just looked at me, with a discreet smile on his lips, as if he knew that the moment wasn't over yet. Over the next few days, the tension between us continued. but it never went beyond that. Every glance exchanged, every subtle gesture was laden with unspoken promises, as if a secret was about to be revealed. I found myself watching Henry from afar, admiring his confident manner and that provocative smile that seemed to defy the world. He was the kind of man who attracted stares from everyone around him, and I found myself caught in his web of charm and mystery. At all times, Ethan was by my side, carefree and excited by his grandfather's company, while I struggled to control the feelings growing inside me. It was an internal battle, a war between what I knew was right and what my treacherous heart ardently desired. Every laugh shared between Ethan and Henry echoed in my mind, mingling with my confused thoughts as I tried to keep up appearances and hide the storm brewing inside me. Each day was a real internal struggle. The atmosphere of the place seemed to intensify my emotions, as if the beauty of the place highlighted the confusion I felt. The laughter of the others at the table sounded distant, as if I were in a separate world where only Henry and I existed. A part of me wanted to scream, to confess everything I felt, while another part feared the consequences this could bring. What would happen if I let this passion take hold of me? What if, by letting myself get carried away, everything ended badly? The questions multiplied in my mind, creating a storm of uncertainty. I felt like I was on the edge of a cliff, wavering between desire and reason, between what I wanted and what I knew was right. On the last night, before we went home, Henry found me on the balcony again. We were alone, and the silence around us seemed to amplify the tension that already existed between us. The sun was setting, and the sky tinged with orange and pink created an almost unreal scene. The soft evening breeze caressed my face, but it couldn't relieve the heat that was building up between us. I looked at him, and our gazes met. "You're so far away," he said, breaking the silence, his voice low and full of a mystery that attracted me like a magnet. "I'm just thinking," I replied, trying to disguise the confusion going on inside me. "Thinking about what?" Henry moved closer, the distance between us decreasing. "What will become of us after all this?" I confessed, feeling my heart race. Fear and excitement mixed in a whirlwind of emotions. He tilted his head, his intense gaze penetrating me. "Sometimes you have to take a risk to find out what you really want." Those words hit me like an electric shock. What did I really want? The security of a stable relationship with Ethan, or the adrenaline rush of something forbidden and exciting with Henry? As the sky darkened, Henry stepped forward, almost as if he was searching for the answer in my gaze. The tension between us was palpable, and for a moment, I forgot about the world around us. "What if we—" he began, hesitating. The way he pronounced the words made my heart soar. I knew he was about to suggest something that could change everything. "What if we—" "What?" I encouraged, my body involuntarily moving towards him. "What if we just put everything aside for a moment?" The closeness of his body was like a flame burning brightly, and I found myself wanting to get closer. The question hung in the air, full of possibilities. The thought of leaving everything behind and losing myself in a moment of pure passion was tempting. But the image of Ethan, smiling and happy with his grandfather, made me hesitate. What I was about to do might not just be a betrayal, but a devastation of something I knew was precious. I don't know," I mumbled, my voice trembling slightly. Doubt consumed me, but the desire to be close to Henry was irresistible. "I just want a moment, Harper. A moment when we can just be us, without any worries," he said, his eyes fixed on mine, as if he could see through my defenses. "Which city are you watching this video from? Leave it in the comments." Time seemed to stop. In that instant, all I wanted was to lose myself in his arms, to feel his warmth against mine. But what if I couldn't go back? What if that was enough to make me forget everything I'd built with Ethan? Henry took another step forward, his body now almost glued to mine. The tension between us was almost electric, and I felt a mixture of fear and excitement. "Harper, I feel like we have a special connection. Something we can't ignore," he murmured, his breath warm against my cheek. Hearing those words, my heart raced, but doubt lingered, like a shadow in my heart. "What about Ethan?" I asked, knowing it was the most important question. "He doesn't need to know. This can be our secret, just for one night. One night that I promise you'll never forget." The boldness in his voice made me shudder. I looked at him, my heart struggling between right and wrong. What I did next could define not only that night, but also my entire future. I needed time. "Henry, I started to say, but he interrupted, taking my hand and looking deeply into my eyes. "Let's just enjoy this moment, Harper. I don't want to rush anything. I just want you to know that I'm here and that you're special to me." At that moment, the decision seemed difficult, but a part of me had already surrendered to temptation. The cool night breeze seemed inviting, and I knew that the stars shining above us held secrets of love and passion. Would I be able to take the risk and live this adventure, even if only for one night? The lights in the house began to fade, and the silence of the night enveloped everything around us. I looked at Henry and, on an impulse, replied, "I don't think I'll be coming here anymore," I said, trying to sound firm, but my voice came out weak, almost like a whisper. My heart was racing, and the tension in the air was palpable. He, in front of me, seemed to absorb every word, every fraction of a second that dragged between us. "Maybe it's for the best," he replied, his gaze never leaving mine. There was a depth in that gaze that held me, as if he could read the most hidden thoughts that lurked inside me. I knew he felt the same intense attraction, but reason was still trying to control the impulse. He moved closer again, but this time there was no touch. Just a look that said everything that needed to be said, without words. At that moment, the world around us disappeared. The sound of leaves swaying in the wind and birds singing seemed distant. We knew that if we had crossed that line, nothing would be the same. But somehow the fact that we had stopped at the edge made everything even more intense, like a fire burning under the surface, ready to explode at any moment. When we finally got home, everything seemed to have returned to normal. Ethan was calm, chatting animatedly about the days on the farm, without imagining what was going on inside me. He talked about his adventures in nature, the hikes we'd taken together, and the moments of laughter we'd shared. I listened to him, but my mind was elsewhere, lost in the memories of that penetrating gaze and the whispers we almost exchanged. At night, while Ethan slept beside me, I couldn't find any rest. The silence in the room was deafening, and thoughts crowded into my head. I remembered the way he leaned in to listen to me, the way his perfume enveloped my body. The attraction I felt for him was undeniable, and this idea tormented me. How could I want someone who wasn't mine? In a moment of weakness, I decided I needed to confront him. Before we left, I called him out to a corner where the moonlight illuminated the garden. The air was fresh, and the scent of flowers filled the space around us. He turned to me, his eyes shining in the moonlight. "What are you thinking?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, but the tremors showed my anxiety. "Minus I..." He hesitated, as if weighing up his words. "I can't stop thinking about us." These words were like an electric shock, and my heart raced. What I really wanted to know was whether he felt the same as me. That overwhelming attraction, the desire to cross the line and see how far everything could go. "We need to be rational," I tried to argue, but the truth was that there was nothing rational about how I felt. Rationality has never been our strong suit. He smiled enigmatically, and warmth rose through my skin. The way he said it, almost teasing me, made me even more confused. At that moment, the temptation became almost unbearable. I wanted to go further. I wanted to know if that moment was just a game or if there was something real between us. But the voice of reason reminded me of Ethan, of everything we had built together, and that held me back. However, The days went by, and every time we met, the tension grew. It was as if we were dancing around a fire, and I knew that, at some point, we could get burned. There were moments when I felt like I was about to declare myself, but something always stopped me. The doubt, the fear of losing everything I already had. Then, one sunny afternoon, while we were alone at the farm, the situation came to a head. I was sitting in a hammock, my thoughts muddled in my mind, when he approached. The sun was shining on his face, and the smile he gave me made my heart race. "You're thinking too much," he said, taking a seat next to me. "It's not easy," I replied, looking at the horizon. I wanted to be honest, but the truth was that I didn't know how to put what I was feeling into words. "You know you can tell me everything," he said, his voice silky smooth. At that moment, time seemed to stop. The connection between us was so strong that I could almost feel it. The line between us was thinner than ever, and the idea of crossing it seemed irresistible. I started, but the words got stuck in my throat. Adrenaline was coursing through my veins, and the fear of confessing what I felt was overwhelming. But in that instant, something changed. His gaze was intense, full of unspoken promises, and I realized there was no turning back. It was as if he was calling me, inviting me to take a step further. But I held on until we got back to our home. When we got home, everything seemed to be back to normal. Ethan was calm, chatting animatedly about the days on the farm, without imagining what was going on inside me. I, on the other hand, was lost in thought, trapped in memories of Henry. It was impossible not to think about him. Every time I closed my eyes, his face appeared in my mind, like a painting that could never be erased. The glow in his eyes, deep and full of life, seemed to call to me. His touch on my skin was like a spell, something that electrified me and left me in a state of vulnerability. It was as if everything we had experienced was engraved in me, in every cell of my body. I remember afternoons on the farm, when the sun shone and the gentle wind danced through the leaves. Henry always had a joke on the tip of his tongue, something that made me laugh until my stomach hurt. And in the midst of the laughter, there were moments of silence that said more than words. We would look at each other and, for a moment, the world around us would disappear. It was just the two of us, as if we were the only inhabitants of that place. I tried to distract myself with the routine at Ethan's side, but it was like trying to ignore an open wound. Ethan was kind and loved me, and I knew it. He would hug me warmly and tell me about his dreams and plans. But deep down, there was an emptiness that I couldn't fill. The memory of Henry was like a shadow that followed me, a part of me that would always be tied to those days on the farm, to what happened to him. If you like this account of infidelity, don't forget to like it and subscribe to the channel. There were days when I found myself daydreaming, imagining what it would be like if things had been different. What would have happened if I had chosen Henry? If we had given each other a chance? These questions haunted me, and I didn't know how to deal with them. Ethan's love was sincere, but Henry had marked me in a way that I could never forget. It was as if I was torn between two worlds, and this internal struggle left me exhausted. The nights were especially difficult. I would lie next to Ethan, and although he held me tightly, I felt alone. An emptiness consumed me, a part of me that wanted to scream, cry, and free itself from this weight that afflicted me. How could I explain this to Ethan? How could I tell him that, even by his side, my heart still belonged to someone else? The thought of hurting Ethan paralyzed me, and yet I couldn't stop thinking about Henry. The longing I felt for Henry was like a hurricane, a whirlwind of emotions that I couldn't control. Some nights, when everything was quiet, the memory of our times together would come flooding back. I remembered how he looked at me, with that intensity that made me feel special. The whispers we exchanged under the starlight, the dreams we shared, everything seemed so vivid. It was a storm of memories that left me breathless. Meanwhile, my life with Ethan continued. He was planning a trip, a romantic getaway for the two of us. And as much as I tried to cheer myself up with the idea, a part of me felt guilty. How could I be happy with him, while my heart still yearned for Henry? The battle inside me was intense. Every time Ethan smiled, I wondered if he knew, if he felt the distance between us, if he realized that, while he loved me, I was still fighting my feelings. Time passed, but the pain and confusion remained. I wanted to move on. I wanted to live fully alongside Ethan. But the truth was that Henry would always be there, like a shadow in my past. It was a memory I couldn't erase, a love that couldn't be forgotten, and as I tried to find my way, I realized that this struggle between what I wanted and what I had would never end. Henry would always be a part of me, and I didn't know how to escape it. So I carried on, trapped in a dilemma that seemed endless, between the life I had chosen and the one I could have lived, between Ethan, who loved me, and Henry, who had left an eternal mark on my soul. And so, on this roller coaster of emotions, I moved on, not knowing where my heart really belonged. That was the day I stayed with my husband's grandfather, my loves. Leave me a comment if you liked this story. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel by activating the bell so you don't miss any VI.